Hey, I just finished my shift. I'm heading out now and we'll be on the road shortly. I'll message you once I'm driving.
Evening, the kind of time when the day feels like it's slowing down, but the roads are still busy. Archana Mehta sent a short message letting someone know she was heading out and would be on the road shortly. It was a routine update, nothing alarming, nothing urgent. She had done this many times before. A few minutes later, surveillance cameras near her apartment complex captured her walking across the parking lot. She was wearing a sweater and jeans, moving at a steady pace, not rushed, not distracted. She reached her car, unlocked the driver's door, and got inside. That moment would become the last confirmed sighting of Archana near her home. From there, the story unfolds almost entirely through cameras, timestamps, and digital traces. A highway camera later recorded her vehicle traveling south. The traffic was light, headlights steady, no erratic movement. The timestamp showed early evening. She was following the route she had planned. Not long after, a gas station camera captured her car pulling up to a pump. She stepped out, refueled, and left within minutes. No one approached her. No one interacted with her. Everything looked normal. The kind of stop thousands of people make every day without a second thought. Later, another camera near a shopping center along the highway recorded something more subtle. A dark vehicle entered the parking lot first. It didn't stand out at the time. Minutes later, Archana's car appeared, turning into the same lot. She parked and stepped out. The final piece of footage shows her standing beside her car, alone, looking around the lot as if orienting herself, possibly scanning for someone she expected to meet. There was no visible interaction. No raised voices, no struggle. After she stepped out of frame, she was never seen again. What happened after that occurred outside the reach of cameras. That gap, just minutes long, would become the center of a long investigation. Archana Mehta vanished that evening, leaving behind questions that would only be answered much later, through a slow and careful reconstruction of events. At the time of her disappearance, Archana was 28 years old. She lived in Chicago, where she had finally begun to feel settled. She worked as a registered nurse at a long-term care facility, mostly night shifts. Her patients were elderly, many with chronic conditions, and the work was demanding but steady. Nursing was not just a job for her. It was a responsibility she took seriously. Her schedule was predictable: work, sleep, grocery runs, short walks when the weather allowed. Her life was quiet by design. She lived alone in a small apartment and kept her personal world intentionally limited. That wasn't because she was antisocial or withdrawn. It was because of what she had already been through. A previous relationship had ended badly, and the experience left marks that didn't fade quickly. Her former boyfriend had been controlling. He monitored her messages, questioned her schedule, and reacted aggressively when she tried to create space. When she finally ended the relationship, it did not end peacefully. There were arguments, there were accusations, there were moments that made her feel watched and cornered. After it was over, Archana blocked him across platforms and cut off contact completely. Friends later said she considered filing for a restraining order, but never followed through. She believed distance would be enough. The breakup changed how she approached people. She became cautious, especially online. She avoided mainstream dating apps. She didn't like the pressure, the speed, or the exposure. She preferred privacy and control over who had access to her time and attention. In January, she joined a smaller platform called Saffron Connect. It was designed for Indian professionals living in the United States. The app required basic verification and focused on shared cultural background rather than casual dating. To Archana, that felt safer, more structured, less random. She didn't upload many photos. Her profile was simple: She ignored most incoming messages. One profile stood out not because it was flashy, but because it wasn't. The name was Colonel Ralph. His profile description was brief. He said he worked in supply chain analytics and that his job involved frequent interstate travel. His first messages were polite and short. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't push for quick replies. When Archana responded, he suggested switching to voice messages instead of texting. He explained that his work involved secure client communications and that he avoided live video calls for compliance reasons. It sounded technical, but not impossible. Archana accepted the explanation without much thought. Kunnel sent clear photographs of himself early on. The images were consistent, same face, same general appearance, similar lighting. He looked ordinary, well, groomed, calm, nothing exaggerated. His voice messages matched the photos. His tone was steady and even. He spoke slowly, clearly, without hesitation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. There was nothing that immediately raised concern. Archana began responding with audio messages too. Eventually, she sent short videos. Sometimes she recorded herself after long shifts, still in scrubs, talking about routine things, difficult patients, staff shortages, missing her parents in Delhi. She talked about her plans to specialize further in nursing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was just sharing her life as it was. Kunnel responded attentively. He remembered details she had mentioned weeks earlier and brought them up naturally. He didn't pressure her to reply quickly. He never commented on when she was online or offline. There were no emotional swings, no jealousy, no demands. Over the next 3 months, their communication settled into a steady rhythm. Some evenings they exchanged several messages. Other days, just one. There were no arguments, no requests for money, no attempts to access her accounts or passwords. He didn't suggest meeting right away, and when Archana expressed hesitation about travel, he didn't object. That consistency reinforced her sense of safety. It felt different from her past experience. When Kunnel eventually mentioned meeting in person, he framed it carefully. He said he would be in Texas for work and suggested that Archana visit for a weekend if she felt comfortable. He emphasized meeting in public first. He suggested she stay in a hotel instead of his apartment. He told her clearly that she should only come if it felt right. Archana mentioned the plan casually to a coworker. She said she liked that he never insisted on video calls or constant reassurance. To her, that restraint felt respectful. It didn't resemble the control she had experienced before. It felt calm, measured. Safe, on a Friday morning in April, Archana packed a small overnight bag. She shared her driving route with a friend and left Chicago by car. There was no sense of urgency or fear. She believed she was traveling to meet someone she already knew well enough to trust. The drive south was uneventful. She followed the planned route, stopping at major rest areas and fuel stations. Each stop left behind ordinary digital traces, card payments, location pings, short voice updates sent through the app. In one message recorded at a rest stop, her tone was relaxed. In another sent from a roadside diner, she recorded a short video showing a cup of coffee and a highway sign behind her. Nothing in her messages suggested stress, confusion, or fear. Kunnel responded consistently. He acknowledged her progress and suggested minor route adjustments to avoid traffic. As she approached Central Texas, he proposed meeting outside Austin instead of inside the city. He said it would be easier for parking and less tiring after a long drive. The location he suggested was a large shopping center near the highway, commonly used by travelers. From an outside perspective, nothing about the plan seemed unusual. It wasn't isolated, it wasn't hidden, it was the kind of place people meet every day at 6:42 p.m. Archana's car was recorded entering the parking lot. Multiple cameras captured her arrival from different angles. She parked in a standard space, stepped out, and stood still for a few seconds. Her body language suggested she was orienting herself, not panicking. She appeared to be looking around, likely trying to spot someone who matched the photos she had been sent. That moment marked the last confirmed visual record of Archana Mehta. Cameras did not show her leaving the lot on foot. They did not show her entering another vehicle. No alarms were triggered. No emergency calls were made from the area. Several vehicles passed through the same section of the lot in the following minutes without incident. At 6:51 p.m., Archana's phone stopped transmitting data. There was no outgoing call, no emergency signal. No final message. Investigators later confirmed that the phone was not powered down manually at that moment. Why the signal ended could not be determined from network data alone. That night, when Archana failed to respond to messages, no immediate alarm was raised. Her parents in Delhi assumed she was resting after the long drive. The time difference and her irregular work schedule made periods of silence normal. By the next morning, concern began to grow. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. A coworker tried to reach her directly and received no response. By Sunday afternoon, more than 24 hours had passed without contact. A missing person report was filed. Police later located Archana's vehicle in the same parking space where it had been recorded the previous evening. The car showed no signs of forced entry, no damage. The interior was neat. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no broken items. The keys were not inside the vehicle. Her phone and personal bag were missing. Other items, including clothing and travel essentials, were still there. At first, investigators classified the case as a possible voluntary disappearance. That is standard when an adult leaves without obvious evidence of force, but that assessment didn't hold for long. Archana hadn't withdrawn unusual amounts of cash. Her bank card hadn't been used after her arrival. No hotel bookings or travel changes were found. Her apartment in Chicago was untouched. Food in the refrigerator hadn't spoiled. Her work schedule showed she was expected back Monday morning. As these details came together, the theory of voluntary disappearance collapsed. There was a clear break in the timeline. Something had happened between her arrival and the moment her phone went silent. Attention turned to the last confirmed contact before she disappeared, the profile named Colonel Ralph. Digital records showed he had been in active communication with Archana during the final hours of her drive. He had given directions. He had suggested the meeting location. At that point, investigators did not know whether he had been physically present at the parking lot. His identity and whereabouts were unverified, but he was now the last known person connected to her before she vanished. And that was where the story began to change. When investigators began looking into the profile known as Colonel Ralph, nothing immediately stood out as criminal. The name itself was common. Database searches returned multiple individuals across several states. At first glance, there was no obvious red flag that pointed to a single suspect. But as detectives started verifying details one by one, the story began to unravel. The first step was employment verification. According to his profile and messages, Connell worked in supply chain analytics and traveled frequently for work. Investigators contacted companies he had mentioned in passing during conversations with Archana. None of them had any record of him. Some never responded. Others replied clearly, stating that no one by that name had worked there in any capacity. There was no employment history that matched the timeline he had described. Next, they searched for a professional footprint. There was no LinkedIn profile that aligned with the same photos, job history, and locations. Pieces existed separately, but they did not connect to a real person. The phone number used by Connell was registered to a prepaid service. It had no billing address, no long-term contract, and no identifiable subscriber. The number had only been activated a few months earlier. Usage records showed it was almost exclusively used for app-based messaging. Traditional voice calls were never made. This pattern caught the attention of digital forensic analysts. When they examined the communication history between Archana and Kunal, one detail became impossible to ignore. Every single interaction was asynchronous. There were no live phone calls, no video chats, no real-time conversations of any kind. All communication happened through recorded voice messages or text. That meant every message could be carefully crafted, recorded multiple times, and sent only when it sounded right. The photos Kunal had shared were also unusual under close review. They were consistent, but too controlled. There was little variation in background, no identifiable locations, no reflections, no environmental clues. Metadata had been stripped from the images. Analysts recognized this as a common tactic in impersonation cases. Static photos and recorded audio reduce risk. They remove spontaneity. They prevent recognition through unexpected emotion, stress, or interruption. At this stage, investigators still didn't know who Kunal really was. But they were becoming increasingly confident that he was not who he claimed to be. As part of the digital review, analysts compared Kunal's voice messages to audio files stored on Archana's devices and cloud accounts. These included old voicemail recordings, saved messages, and short clips from previous years. The comparison was not casual. It involved structural voice analysis, cadence, pacing, pronunciation, breathing patterns. One comparison triggered an immediate alert. The match wasn't vague or suggestive. It was strong. The voice patterns aligned closely with a known sample. That sample belonged to Ritesh Malhotra, Archana's former boyfriend. Ritesh had been reported for harassment 2 years earlier after their relationship ended. Records showed a pattern of controlling behavior. He demanded constant updates, reacted aggressively to delays, and made threats when Archana tried to distance herself. After the breakup, Archana blocked him on all platforms and changed parts of her routine. A restraining order had been discussed, but never formally filed. Following the breakup, Ritesh moved out of state. Employment records showed frequent job changes and address shifts over the next year. There had been no direct contact between him and Archana since she cut him off, or at least none that she recognized. Analysts ran multiple comparisons using different samples. Independent reviewers were brought in. The results were consistent. The probability of coincidence was extremely low. The voice used by Kunal Ralph and the voice of Ritesh Malhotra were the same. With that finding, investigators re-examined everything. The photos attributed to Kunal were traced back to public social media accounts belonging to an unrelated man living overseas. The images were several years old. None had been taken recently. The conclusion was clear. Kunal Ralph did not exist. The identity had been constructed deliberately. Investigators now understood that the communication style had not been cautious by accident. It had been engineered. Live video was avoided because it would have exposed facial features. Live calls were avoided because they increased the risk of vocal recognition. Audio messages allowed control. They allowed multiple attempts. They allowed editing out hesitation. Timing mattered too. Ritesh had not contacted Archana immediately after their breakup. He waited. He allowed time and distance to dull recognition. He approached her as someone new, neutral, and calm. He rebuilt access slowly, without triggering the defenses she had developed from her past experience. What Archana interpreted as respect and restraint was, in reality, a staged re-entry. Investigators concluded that the planned meeting was not spontaneous. It was the endpoint of a calculated impersonation designed to bring Archana into physical proximity under false pretenses. At this point, the case was still officially classified as a missing person investigation. There was no body, no confirmed crime scene, no direct physical evidence. Procedure required caution. Ritesh Malhotra was contacted and asked to come in for a voluntary interview as a person of interest. He agreed. He was told clearly that he was not under arrest. During the interview, Ritesh acknowledged that he and Archana had dated in the past. He described the relationship as mutual and said it had ended over a year earlier. He denied any recent contact. He said he had not spoken to her since the breakup and knew nothing about her travel plans. When investigators mentioned the name Kunal Ralph, he said he didn't recognize it. He was asked where he had been the weekend Archana disappeared. Ritesh stated that he had remained in Houston the entire time. He said he had not traveled to Austin or anywhere nearby. He didn't provide documentation, but he spoke with confidence. Investigators did not challenge him. They didn't confront him with the voice analysis. They didn't accuse him of lying. They allowed him to finish his statement and leave. Only after Ritesh left did investigators begin verifying his claims. Automated license plate reader data was requested for highways connecting Houston and Austin. The results were precise. A vehicle registered to Ritesh Malhotra had been recorded entering the shopping center area outside Austin minutes before Archana arrived. He had arrived first. That alone contradicted his statement. Further analysis showed that his vehicle avoided the main parking aisles covered by retail cameras. Instead, it entered a service perimeter along the rear of the lot. That area had limited camera coverage. Cell tower data placed his phone in that sector for less than 12 minutes. The short duration suggested purpose, not coincidence. Investigators compared this data with surveillance footage of Archana's arrival. At 6:42 p.m., she parked, stepped out, and scanned the area. Shortly after, she moved out of camera view. No footage showed her leaving alone. Based on timing and location, detectives concluded that Ritesh approached Archana shortly after she arrived. He would have known exactly where she was. Recognition likely happened immediately. Investigators believed it was triggered by his voice, not his appearance. The encounter did not happen in a visible public aisle. Camera blind spots aligned with the service road behind the lot, partially shielded by landscaping and delivery access. No witnesses later reported hearing raised voices. No disturbance was reported. Later that night, license plate readers recorded Ritesh's vehicle traveling northbound away from Austin. Shortly after that, his phone disconnected from the network. The device remained offline for several hours. This was unusual. His normal usage showed regular background data connections even when idle. 3 days into the search, investigators expanded beyond the shopping center. Using travel, time analysis, they focused on secondary roads reachable within a short drive from the lot. Search teams combed wooded drainage areas and rural access points. That's where they found her. Archana's body was located in a wooded drainage area off a county road. The location was hidden from the main roadway but accessible by vehicle. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be manual strangulation. Bruising and soft tissue damage showed sustained pressure to the neck. Defensive injuries on her arms and hands indicated she fought back. The manner of death was ruled homicide. Physical evidence recovered from the scene included fibers embedded in her clothing. Lab analysis showed they were consistent with upholstery from Ritesh's vehicle. Soil samples from the drainage area matched residue found in his wheel wells. Investigators obtained GPS data from Ritesh's car. It showed northbound travel the night Archana disappeared, followed by brief stops near secondary roads consistent with the recovery site. This directly contradicted his statement that he had remained in Houston. At that point, the case shifted fully from investigation to prosecution. Ritesh Malhotra was arrested 10 days after Archana disappeared. He was taken into custody without incident. During the initial custodial interrogation, he agreed to speak briefly before requesting a lawyer. He denied intending to harm her. He acknowledged traveling to Austin, but described the meeting as an attempt to get closure. He said emotions escalated unexpectedly. He did not describe the confrontation and stopped answering questions. No confession was obtained. Prosecutors did not rely on his statements. Instead, they built their case on preparation and pattern. They argued that this was not a spontaneous act, but the result of deliberate impersonation and planning. The false identity had been created months in advance. Communication was controlled. Detection was avoided. Travel was coordinated. The meeting location was selected for access and limited visibility. Digital experts testified that Ritesh monitored Archana's travel in real time. Messages and routing suggestions showed awareness of her location. The meeting point was not random, it was chosen. Recovered drafts from Ritesh's devices showed unresolved fixation. One unsent message read, "She thinks she can erase me." Prosecutors argued this showed motive, not emotion alone. The defense argued emotional distress. They claimed the impersonation was a misguided attempt to reconnect. They emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses and framed the killing as impulsive. The jury was instructed to consider the full sequence of actions. Not one moment, but the entire course of conduct. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict. Ritesh Malhotra was found guilty of first-degree murder and identity fraud. The consistency of evidence mattered most. The same person who created a false identity, avoided recognition, traveled to intercept, denied contact, and left the area was the same person whose actions aligned with Archana's disappearance and death. After the verdict was read, the courtroom did not erupt into noise or visible reaction. There were no dramatic outbursts, no shouted words, no sudden movement. Ritesh Malhotra remained seated, expression controlled, eyes forward. He had already been warned by his attorneys that the evidence was overwhelming. The guilty verdict did not surprise anyone who had followed the trial closely. What remained was sentencing. Prosecutors requested life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. They argued that the crime was not only violent but methodical. The impersonation had taken months, the deception had been intentional, the meeting had been orchestrated. Archana had not been killed in a moment of confusion. She had been lured into proximity under false pretenses. The state emphasized that the danger was not sudden anger, but calculated access. The defense argued for a lesser sentence. They repeated claims of emotional instability and loss of control. They pointed to the absence of prior violent convictions. They framed the crime as the tragic result of obsession rather than premeditation, but the court rejected that framing. The judge stated that intent could be demonstrated through preparation, not just immediate action. The impersonation, the travel, the selection of location, and the denial afterward formed a continuous chain. Ritesh Malhotra was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was entered immediately. There were no additional hearings, no modification, no delay. Archana's parents participated in the sentencing remotely from India. They did not speak at length. Court records note only brief statements confirming identity and acknowledging the judgment. They did not ask for publicity. They did not request statements be read aloud. When the session ended, their connection was closed. After that, they did not communicate further with the court. For the legal system, the case was complete. Files were closed, evidence was cataloged and stored, the appeals window passed without action, the judgment stood. For the people who had known Archana, closure was less defined. In Chicago, her absence was felt quietly. The long-term care facility where she worked struggled to fill her position. Her patients asked about her for weeks. Some staff members avoided discussing it openly, unsure how to explain that someone so present could simply be gone. Eventually, her coworkers organized a small scholarship fund in her name. It was not announced publicly. It was designed to support international nurses entering elder care and rehabilitation specialties. The same path Archana had planned to pursue. The fund operated privately, without press coverage or social media campaigns. Her apartment lease was terminated quietly. Her belongings were shipped to her family. No memorial service was held in the United States. In Delhi, her parents conducted private rites according to their traditions. There were no interviews, no public statements. Her family chose to grieve outside of public view. The dating platform Archana had used also changed after the case. Though the company did not reference her by name, internal communications confirmed that the investigation influenced policy updates. Identity verification processes were strengthened. Anonymous audio. Only accounts were restricted. Photo validation became stricter. Users were shown clearer warnings about impersonation risks and delayed recognition. The changes were framed as safety improvements, not reactions to a single case, but internally, the connection was understood. Law enforcement agencies documented the investigation as a training example. Not because the methods used were advanced, but because they were not. Investigators noted that the crime relied on patience, familiarity, and timing, no sophisticated hacking, no advanced surveillance, no technical skill beyond basic digital literacy. The impersonation worked because it moved slowly and avoided detection. Each step on its own was not illegal. The crime emerged from how those steps were combined. Training summaries emphasized that the case was solved without eyewitnesses and without a confession. Resolution came through alignment, digital records, movement data, forensic evidence. Each element narrowed the range of explanations until nothing else fit. Investigators described it as cumulative proof rather than a single decisive moment. Archana's digital footprint was archived and sealed as evidence. Her messages, photos, and recordings became part of a closed file. They were no longer a record of a young woman's daily life, but of how that life had been accessed and manipulated. In reviewing the case, investigators made one observation that appeared repeatedly in internal reports. Archana did not ignore warning signs out of carelessness. She applied boundaries based on experience. She avoided fast intimacy. She avoided public exposure. She limited access. She believed distance would protect her. That belief was the failure point. Distance had allowed her attacker to re-enter her life unnoticed. Time reduced recognition. Controlled communication removed spontaneity. Familiarity without presence created trust. The impersonation did not depend on technology. It depended on patience and restraint. The final investigative summary reduced the case to a simple conclusion. Archana Mehta did not disappear by chance. She was not killed by a stranger. She was reached through a voice that sounded safe enough to pass unnoticed until proximity made recognition unavoidable. With the sentence imposed and policies adjusted, the system moved on. Records were closed. Training materials were updated. Another case file was added to archives. But the story itself remained as a warning, not about dating apps or travel or technology alone, but about how control can be rebuilt quietly when it is disguised as respect. For viewers watching from anywhere in the world, the case leaves a difficult truth. Safety is not only about recognizing threats that are loud or aggressive. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is what feels calm, patient, and familiar. What happened to Archana Mehta was not sudden, and it was not random. It unfolded quietly over months through patience, timing, and deception. There was no forced entry into her life, no dramatic warning that something was wrong. Instead, the danger arrived in a familiar voice, steady and calm, carrying the illusion of safety. That is what makes this case so unsettling. It shows how harm does not always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in. Archana did many things right. She set boundaries after a painful past. She avoided rushed connections. She limited access to her personal life. She trusted slowly. Her story is not about carelessness or poor judgment. It is about how trust can be manipulated when someone already knows how you think, how you speak, and what makes you feel safe. Distance did not protect her. Time did not erase recognition. It only delayed it. This case also shows how modern investigations work when there are no witnesses and no confession. It was solved through alignment, small pieces of data coming together. Cameras, voice patterns, location records, and forensic evidence each told part of the story. No single detail explained everything, but together they removed every alternative explanation. The truth did not arrive in a dramatic moment. It emerged slowly, the same way the deception did. For those watching, Archana's story is not meant to create fear, but awareness. Not every threat looks aggressive. Not every danger feels urgent. Control can return in quieter forms, disguised as patience, politeness, and restraint. Real safety comes not just from setting boundaries, but from understanding that someone determined to cross them may wait until they no longer look like a threat. If this story made you think, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you follow true crime to understand how these cases happen, not just how they end, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll continue to tell stories that focus on facts, patterns, and the lessons they leave behind. Thank you for watching.